When it comes to cybersecurity, a proper mindset is your greatest asset. The wrong mindset is your greatest liability. For this conversation, I need you to leave your ego at the door. I want to encourage you to have a mindset of humility and curiosity. I know that cybersecurity is one of those things that if you're not in the field, it just seems overwhelming. It's uninteresting. It's boring to people that aren't in it. You see breaches all the time on the news, and that leads you to think it's impossible anyways. So why stress out about it? Why spend any money on it? Why think about it very much? After all, it's over your head. You don't care. If you come in with the mindset of humility and curiosity, however, it'll lead you to know that this subject may not be your specialty, but that's okay. It also should then lead you to the conclusion that you're going to need some help. Ultimately, we need to get to the point to where we're valuing our clients' privacy as well. And that's really what it's about. Curiosity will lead us to explore what the threats really are and what our responsibilities really are in our respective businesses. You individuals are leaders in your own practices. You are trying to build a practice to help other people with their ailments, with different things that they're facing, and that's wonderful. But why do so many physicians ignore cybersecurity as part of their practice? I want to suggest that it's mostly, and you can think in your mind why you might be ignoring it if you are, because they don't understand it and it costs a fortune. That's the mindset around cybersecurity as a whole. If I don't understand something and it costs a lot of money, I'm likely just to tune out. What difference does it make? This is beyond me and I don't really care. But that's the wrong mindset to have. That's a defeatist mindset, first of all. But beyond that, it's going to lead us to a lot of business problems and a lot of problems ethically when it comes to our clients' information. What I want to do in the course of our conversation for just a little while is to go over some common threats that are out there facing small healthcare practices. We're going to talk about some responsibilities that come with leading a practice, and we're going to talk about due diligence and ethics and business operations as a part of that. Then we'll just kind of wrap up with some final thoughts, but this is going to be very straightforward, very conversational, very practical, and that's my goal, that you can turn off this when it's all said and done, and you're able to walk away and say, hey, I got something actually useful. I'm not going to be throwing out a lot of jargon, acronyms, and things like that around cybersecurity. I'm not going to be getting deep in the weeds with regard to the firewalls and antivirus types and all this kind of stuff. I'll do that just as little as possible because I know it's not something that you're most likely very concerned with. But there are people that have those as their passions and interests, and so I'm going to direct you to those individuals at the end. Here is where I think it is for you as a practice leader. First of all, let's hit some common threats that are out there. Just a couple. There's a whole list of things you could talk about that you may face, but here are the things that I've seen most commonly. First of all, ransomware. A ransomware is a huge threat to your practice. The Department of Health and Human Services reports a 93% increase in large breaches reported from 2018 to 2022, with a 278% increase in large breaches reported to OCR involving ransomware from 2018 to 2022. So these things have been increasing. It's starting to level out a little bit now just because so much has been done already. So many breaches have happened, but it's a lot. A lot of companies are hit with ransomware. It can have a huge impact on your business. I have seen small medical practices put out of business through ransomware attacks, and certainly we don't want that to happen. Secondly, phishing attacks. A lot of times ransomware begins with phishing attacks, but I want to kind of set this aside separately because we're going to consider it as part of best practices in just a little while, how to protect from it. Around 80% of successful attacks involve humans in some way. Email is the most common access to your team for attackers. So we need to be thinking a lot about email security when it comes to small practices. And there are some common mistakes that I see medical practices making with regard to email. Third, we're going to talk about bank fraud for just a little bit. Now, it doesn't seem like it's cybersecurity, but it so often is. I've seen multiple cases of cyber breaches leading to large sums of money being stolen from small medical practices. Banking information often found in the physician's email account is how that begins, although it can get more complicated from there. So those three things make up so much of what I deal with when it comes to small medical practices, that those are the big things that I want to have in your mind for the sake of our conversation here in our time together. So what are some responsibilities that you have as a practice leader with regard to cybersecurity? Well, first of all, I want you to think from a legal perspective. You need to be able to prove that you've done your due diligence to protect yourself from lawsuits. And lawsuits are most likely to come if you have a breach in some manner. We'll come back to that here in just a little while. Secondly, I want to think from an ethical perspective. You're making this great effort to try to secure the health of your patients. You also need to be making a reasonable effort to safeguard your client's private information. So I want to talk for just a little while about the ethical requirements that are on you for handling that type of information. Thirdly, we're going to consider these things from a business perspective. So put yourself just in that business owner's mindset. You're aiming for the greatest ROI in accomplishing the aforementioned goals and maintaining business operations, right? So we're going to think about cybersecurity as well, just from a business operations standpoint. So first of all, we're going to go to the due diligence side of it. A lot of my work is done alongside cyber attorneys. I'm the easy button for cyber attorneys. Oftentimes, these are dealing with various types of breaches across industries, but a lot of it comes down to medical. And so how I get engaged usually is a cyber attorney calls me up and says, hey, such and such has happened in one of my client environments. We're going to need individuals to do these various types of things. For instance, they might need a forensics investigation. They might need incident response to try to get the environment back up and running. They may need to meet somebody that's going to do some specialty work for them around, like, for instance, identifying whose private identifying information was exposed so that they can be notified. There's all these different companies and different niches in cybersecurity. And what I basically do is facilitate bringing different parties in depending on what's needed in a particular engagement. That's why I'm the easy button, because I have all of these different vendors, specialists, contractors that do different types of things, and I basically match up the best solution with what's needed. Well, what that also has shown me is what it looks like when it goes to court. Through working with all of these cyber attorneys, their mindset is very different than someone that might be a cybersecurity practitioner, for instance. An attorney is primarily thinking about, how do we say, judge, this client was doing their due diligence to secure their environment, so they really aren't liable for the things that have happened, for the information that was exposed, and try to protect them from some of the legal damages that are coming from that. So let's think about it in practical terms. If you are a small office, you have a small team of people working there, in general, you're most likely to have a managed service provider, an MSP, as they're called. MSPs do all of the IT work, and you likely are using one right now. If you're not, I want to encourage you to think about getting an MSP involved, because there's just a lot of different pieces that go into your IT program. Now, this is what I'll recommend to you. More and more MSPs are adding on an increased security package as a separate offering. In other words, you can take your bill and it maybe raises it up by a quarter or a third or whatever in order to add an advanced security package. And you might not look at that and know what exactly is being added. So very quickly, I want to give you some high-level things that are often being added to that and why that's relevant to your due diligence. So usually those packages include some type of full network monitoring, a SOC option. SOC, SOC, stands for Security Operations Center. There are cyber specialists that monitor client environments, looking in real time for indicators of compromise. Maybe this particular SOC option is just monitoring some antivirus type alerts that are coming in. Maybe they're monitoring the dark web for credentials that have been exposed and found online, so you know that you've been breached because credentials are being put out there in the dark web. There's different types of offerings within those SOC solutions, and you need to talk to your MSP to understand what each of their offerings may include on that increased package. Most of the time, these MSPs are actually outsourcing that piece to a specialty SOC service. So there are now many SOC services that work alongside MSPs. They get white labeled or something like that, so that it's an easy button that MSP that doesn't have the skill set in their staff, they can just throw some additional tools in the environment and someone else is going to be monitoring that. That's actually preferable, because most of the time these MSPs don't really know what they're doing on the cyber program beyond the very basic things that are there. So I want to encourage you to seriously consider increasing your service, add that security package on. The reason being is because if you ever do have a breach and you're facing some type of legal ramifications for that, you can point to that and say, look, we were taking security seriously. We were paying additional money to have network monitoring done, to have dark web monitoring done, those types of things. So with regard to that package, just think about it from the standpoint of not this is going to cost me X number more dollars per employee or whatever else per month, but how much that could save you on the back end by being able to say we were going above and beyond what we might have been expected to do, and we still were breached. So judge, don't slap our hands too hard here. It actually goes a really long way. Another thing, though, that you might want to really keep in mind with regard to due diligence is the fact that most MSPs are terrible at cybersecurity. I've seen so many times companies fail repeated security assessments, even though they were paying a lot of money to some MSP. I've seen companies breached and they had been using an MSP. I've even dealt with cases where MSPs were being breached and their clients were breached through them. So one thing to note about MSPs is they have a lot of stuff to deal with. They're dealing with all types of software programs, all types of licensing, all types of user maintenance that they're having to jump in and fix all these different types of problems. So they're not just focused on cybersecurity. There's so much in IT, and cybersecurity has all of these different niches that it's most like your MSP really doesn't know a lot in depth about cybersecurity. So I would encourage you to have a separate annual cyber assessment done. Now, for HIPAA requirements, you may know that you're required to have an assessment done, but many times people try to use their MSP to check that box. They say, oh, hey, just do a quick one over in our environment, make sure everything's there. And so we checked the box for HIPAA compliance and moved on. But you really don't want the MSP evaluating themselves. You want someone outside of that MSP coming in and looking at the security of the environment. An independent cyber service to come in and do an individual cyber assessment is your best bet. They're not involved with that MSP. They are not interested in either bashing or in upholding the work of the MSP. They're giving you a more independent assessment of what's going on in your environment. And I've seen every single time an assessment has been done where there's been an MSP in place, strong corrective measures prescribed from the cyber provider. That's a great benefit that actually can help your MSP to strengthen their cyber program across all of their clients, to have that independent assessment done of what they're doing in your environment. But regardless of that, it's good for you because you're going to be able to look at that report and you're going to be able to go to your MSP and say, hey, make these changes. We've had this assessment done and here's where you're falling short. You're also going to be able to make some internal improvements if they catch just process things that you're not doing well internally that has nothing to do with the MSP. And again, you're going to be able to stand before a judge one day with this in hand. You're going to be able to say, look, not only did we have this MSP and we had this advanced security package, we also had independent assessments done and we made them the corrective measures that they prescribed every year. And I'll tell you what, if you do those things, you actually have those assessments done and you implement the changes that are there and you document that, you're going to really be strongly protected from being liable when it comes to cases that are brought into court. That's a huge win. That will save you a lot of money in the long run. No, you won't feel it on a month-to-month basis, those savings. You're going to feel like that's a cost center. But when it comes down to something actually taking place, you're going to be much better than most practices are. Now, you've watched the news. We started out by observing how so many times you turn on the news and you see some breach, and a lot of these are really big companies that had really advanced cyber programs, and you say, well, it's hopeless. Okay, let's say you're right. Let's say it is hopeless. What does that mean? That means you're likely to end up in court over a breach. It's likely that you will be breached at some point. So from a practical standpoint, do you want to have good legal defense? Or do you want to have a really poor legal defense for your individual practice's cyber program? Here's how you get it. Just those things that I just described. It's going to go a long way. If you're doing both of those things that I described, you're making those recommended remediations in your environment, you will have gone a long way towards doing your due diligence to protect your client's information. So the next thing then, as far as your responsibilities goes, we mentioned was ethics. Now, you might not want to hear an ethics conversation from someone like me, but you're going to for just a moment. So bear with me. Think about this. You have a responsibility to provide privacy to your patients. Now, you know that's true when it comes to all of the work that you're doing with them on a regular basis. You know that when they come into your office and they have some procedure done, or you diagnose them with something, that you should not be going out and telling your buddies on the golf course, hey, such and such was in my office the other day and they have this going on in their body. That would be a big issue. You know that already. So think about your cyber program in similar terms, because there's somebody that wants to know your client's information. Maybe it's not what disease they have or what issues they have. In that way, maybe it's just their private identifying, their personal identifying information. It's still your responsibility to do your best to protect that within reason. So here's a couple of just hard-hitting things I want to just throw out to you. If you already have a practice going, you likely are doing these things because I've seen it so many times. So here's what it is. Stop using universal passwords. Stop it. If you've got one password you're using on a lot of different things, you need to stop it. You will be breached. It is unethical because it's so likely that you're going to be breached through those efforts. I know that's bold. I'm not trying to step on your toes, but I see it all the time. Beyond that, do not allow your employees to share email accounts or logins. Not only is that a HIPAA violation, because if they're putting PII in a shared email account that all of the different employees can see, that is a violation of HIPAA because you don't know where that's going. You don't know who's using it for what. But not only is that a HIPAA violation, it's just abusing the trust of your client. They expected this to be kept only to the people that are on a need-to-know basis. So stop that practice. Don't allow your employees to do it. Don't allow them to share their logins. Make them have separate accounts for email and all those types of things. And stop disabling multi-factor authentication. I know you hate it. I know you hate that when you're logging into something, you get this alert and it says, hey, is this okay? Put in this code, all of that. Someone's trying to log in. I know you hate it, but it is hugely beneficial. Not only is it a HIPAA violation to do all of those things that I just mentioned, it's just negligent behavior. It is negligent, and it's going to be seen as negligent in court. This could tie in easily to our due diligence conversation, but it's negligent just from an ethical perspective. So why are those poor practices so common? And here's the truth, because physicians hate being inconvenienced. You hate being inconvenienced, and so you do things that make your life a little bit easier. Hey, we're all guilty of cutting some corners and trying to make our lives a little bit easier. I get it. It's understandable, but you've got to put a little more thought into what your clients are expecting from you than that. In other words, your clients didn't come to you to make your life easier. Your clients came to you because they trust you. They trust you to bring expertise, to bring care, compassion, awareness. They trust you with their most private parts. So when you're thinking about cutting those corners, you're thinking about sharing those email accounts, the logins and all that because it's easier. You're thinking about turning off multi-factor because it's easier. You're thinking about using a universal password for everything because it's easier. It won't be easier when a breach happens. And it's not going to be something that your clients appreciate. They will feel violated by the breach that's taken place. Complex passwords, individual user accounts, multi-factor authentication, they are perhaps the biggest bang for your buck that you can do with your cyber program. All of those things are cheap. They just take a little bit more effort. But it's an ethical decision to prioritize your client's privacy over your personal comfort. That's what it comes down to. Your comfort, your ease, or the client's privacy. So I want to encourage you just to think about it in those terms and make it an ethical decision that we're going to do these things, even though sometimes it annoys me to have to do the multi-factor login, even though people want to share email so that they can all send out group things together. I encourage you, think about it differently, because those things are the sources of so many breaches that take place. So much personal information is exposed through very simple, negligent practices. So just cut them out and focus on doing something better. Lastly, I want to talk about it from a business operations perspective. Ransomware will shut your business down. I've seen M&A transactions forced through ransomware where enough business was lost or they were out of business for enough time that they ended up just saying we had to sell. We have to sell because we can't afford to stay in business anymore. We lost some clients, we had some fines or whatever else. Sometimes it just shuts you down so long that you don't have enough revenue coming in, and that's the end of it. However, you can prevent the vast majority of successful ransomware attacks by ensuring that your MSP is doing two things. First of all, keeping patches in your environment up to date. You assume that they're doing that, but you'd be amazed how often they're not. So often MSPs are way behind on their patch schedule. And that's the type of thing that an independent security assessment is going to reveal. They're going to see that this antivirus platform is not up to date, that the software solutions are not up to date, that you really should have done this OS, your operating system patch, a long time ago, and it's been being put off and put off and put off. Those little types of things, firmware on the firewalls, all those types of things, if they're not up to date, you're not getting the latest protections from ransomware. The variants change. Those things have to be kept up to date. So that's a very important component of your program. And then the second thing that your MSP needs to be doing is using next-gen endpoint protection platforms. Old school antivirus is ineffective against ransomware. If you went down to Best Buy and you purchased some off-the-shelf antivirus program and you threw it on all of your endpoints and you say, hey, we have antivirus, congratulations, you will be protected from some things, but you will not be protected from ransomware. It's just the way that it goes. In order to stop ransomware these days, you typically need a behavior-based solution. Now, I'm not going to get into the weeds on why that is because, again, you likely don't care about it, and that's fine. But your MSP typically can have something like that through a next-gen solution, usually as part of that security package upgrade. It's going to be a different brand than the things you're going down to Best Buy to grab. It's a business solution, and it's behavior-based. In other words, it's not looking for the exact signature of, hey, this is a virus. Here's the exact signature of a virus. Let's take that out. This is looking for odd behaviors. Hey, why is that PDF changing and trying to encrypt files? It doesn't matter if it recognizes the signature. It says that's odd behavior and it shuts it down. It sends an alert to that security operations center we mentioned earlier, and they get in to investigate on what's going on. That's just a good thing to have in your environment. It'll go a long way toward protecting you from ransomware. Then just a note on those bank fraud cases that we mentioned earlier. So much of that is going to come through those users, that phishing that's being done. So you want to include a user training program. That's so important to continue business operations because your people are dealing with interactions every day via email. They're looking at their emails over and over and over again, and they're going to receive all types of requests via email. You need to do some training with them so that they understand what is suspicious and what they should and shouldn't do, even as a matter of policy. Now, again, your MSP should be offering some type of user training. They should be doing some type of phishing attacks against your employees from time to time. And so when they click that link, or they go to some link that asks them for their login information and it's a false link and all that they're learning they shouldn't be doing that. Hey, that was a false link. Here's how you could have recognized it. And they'll be able to turn and do something different in the future. Those user training programs are very important to keep your business functioning well while everybody's just trying to go through their day-to-day. You also need to build some typical processes for things like transactions, money being transferred and stuff like that. You need to have a policy with your bank so that they always call to confirm that it's you trying to do those things or someone on your team. You certainly need to also be thinking about it from the standpoint of a written policy. We never transfer money without picking up the phone and calling a number that was not on that email you just received, calling a number that we have for that client or whatever it is, so that we can confirm that that change of wiring information was accurate, that it wasn't some type of fraud that's there. In other words, we have to build in a curiosity as well into our employees and the freedom to say, hey, I'm not going to send that just yet. I'm going to check on that. The user training program is going to help with that tremendously. You don't have to be a big shop to get hit in those ways. In fact, you're probably more likely as a small shop to get hit in those ways because your people haven't been trained appropriately to look out for those types of things. So when you're breaking this all down from a risk perspective, these are the types of things that a small practice are most commonly dealing with. And if you start looking at your cyber program from that perspective, hey, what are the most common types of the threats I'm going to be facing? And who can I bring in to help us get ready for those things? Then it's okay that you don't know about it. It's okay that you don't really care about it. You just need to do some basic practices that are going to keep your cyber program looking overall pretty healthy. If you've done the things that we've discussed and you still get breached, hey, that's possible. If you got targeted and they were really going after you, because they're not going to get you in a drive-by if you're doing all of these things. If they're really targeting your practice and they go after you, you may still be breached. You need to have an incident response plan in place. That's basically just a written policy. This is what we do when we realize we've been breached. Here are the people that we call. Here are the processes that we go through. And you can certainly get groups to come in and help you do that. Those same cyber firms I mentioned know how to build incident response plans. But if you have that plan in place, you know what to do when that happens. You've done your due diligence. So when you go to court, you're going to be able to say, hey, we were doing our best. You're going to be able to say, I was ethically doing what I should be doing to try to protect my client's information. But no one expects you to spend all of your revenue on securing your environment. They just expect you to take it seriously, to care about your patient's privacy, and to do what you can do within reason. So if you're humble enough to know that this is not your area of expertise, and you're curious enough to explore the threats and how best to protect your business and clients, a reasonable cybersecurity program is definitely within reach. It is definitely affordable, and it's the normal cost of doing business. If I can help you in any way, I want to be able to do that, certainly. What I do basically is I source cyber solutions. I source cyber talent, contractors, firms, whatever, that best align with the needs of your organization. You can check out my website at crucial-cyber.com. You can reach out to me through that website or email me at jmccorkle, MCCORKLE, at crucial-cyber.com. I really appreciate your time. I hope that was beneficial. See you soon.